Hey everyone, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard, the channel where we discuss the issues that affect men and boys in today's society and bring awareness to them. My name is Dan, and this is another in my series of videos called The Falsehoods of Feminism, where I debunk common beliefs and claims that feminism makes towards men and boys. And today I'm going to be talking about a commonly held belief that many women, not just feminists, but women in general, have, which is that fathers don't want to remain active in or have custody of their children after a divorce. It's something you hear all the time from divorced mothers who claim that men, the fathers of their children, did not want custody of the children or failed to pursue it in court. Yet when you speak to those men, those fathers, you get a completely different story. Those men have fought hard to stay connected to their children, often spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to do so. Yet they still have to face the stigma and labeling that is put on them by the mothers of their children, who more often than not are believed, without question. And this dynamic has been long used to justify or outright dismiss the systemic inequalities that fathers face in family law, especially with regard to being able to parent their sons and daughters post-divorce. And while it is a commonly held belief, the facts, as we will show, prove that belief to be completely wrong. The oversimplified narrative misrepresents the experiences of countless fathers who are deeply committed to their children, but who are disadvantaged by the legal, societal, and financial barriers that they face. In this video, we will delve deeper into the myth and show the actual facts with regard to how often fathers are awarded custody and why they often have no other choice but to give up. We will also examine the biases embedded in the system, the societal attitudes that reinforce them, and the economic incentives that in the end shape almost all custody decisions. We will also discuss how this paradigm has hurt children and caused devastating, irreparable harm to multiple generations now. Our goal is that by addressing these issues comprehensively, it becomes clear to anyone listening that, contrary to the feminist narrative that fathers are to blame, that they simply aren't interested in caring for their children or loving them, the real problem is society's refusal to recognize just how vital a role fathers play in their children's lives and how a family court system that is fundamentally unequal further exacerbates that failure. Further, we'll show how the system is designed and encourages mothers to disenfranchise fathers from their children for financial gain. Let's dive in, shall we? The perception that fathers are less interested in custody stems from deeply ingrained and long outdated societal norms, as well as legal doctrines that go back hundreds of years. While some, including myself, argue that the norms those beliefs are based on never existed, as I've covered in previous videos, the reality is that even if they did, that society no longer exists. The biggest doctrine, and the one that the legal system itself now claims is no longer relevant, yet still sticks to like glue, is what's known as the tender years doctrine. This long disproven doctrine, which in a nutshell states that children, especially under the age of 7, or as some claim 4, are better off being cared for by their mother. It is based on the belief that mothers are inherently better at parenting, especially for young children, than fathers are, and thus custody should be presumed to be awarded to the mother unless she's been found to be unfit. A founding which, however, doesn't apply even when it's proven that the mother was utterly incapable of caring for the children or outright abusive towards them. Historically, the tender years doctrine has dominated custody decisions and was in fact written into law in many states. The tender years doctrine was long ago completely discredited. Yet, as I said, it's still written into law in some form in many states, including, for example, Utah and Pennsylvania, which both have a preference for placing younger children in the mother's custody. And even in states where the laws have been rewritten to remove the doctrine, the judges in those states, well, they still tend to adhere to it, to still apply it when making custody decisions, with little to no risk to them to face any consequences for doing so. Although many jurisdictions have moved away from this doctrine in favor of the best interests of the child standard, which is in and of itself a bad standard, and really nothing more than a nebulous term with no real definition. In some ways, it's just putting lipstick on the pig that is the tender years doctrine. Because while those laws may have been cleaned up, how they are implemented, how they are applied in custody decisions, is something completely different. There really is no debate that the tender years doctrine persists in how courts perceive and evaluate parental roles, and largely is the basis for how judges award custody. This isn't conjecture or a conspiracy theory, which many feminists, the bar associations, and the legal system as a whole like to claim. Virtually every reputable divorce attorney I've spoken to in the past 30 years has privately, and in some cases publicly, acknowledged and confirmed that this bias exists, that the tender years doctrine is alive and well in the court system. And they'll also say that if they're doing their job correctly as legal advisors, then they are obligated to tell the fathers they represent that at best it's an uphill battle, and more often than not an impossible one if they choose to seek custody. More on that in a bit. Despite the tender years doctrine being long discredited, and despite politicians and judges' claims to the contrary, the indisputable fact remains that mothers are often presumed to be the primary caregivers based on traditional gender roles, while fathers are seen as secondary or even optional when it comes to child rearing. In fact, as many put it, mom doesn't need to prove anything. It's just assumed she's a great parent, even when evidence is showing otherwise. On the other hand, dads are required to go above and beyond in proving not just that they can care for their children, but that they present no danger to them whatsoever. A mere allegation or even a suggestion of impropriety made by the mother, something that they often do in custody cases, is seen by judges as grounds not just to deny fathers custody, but often even their ability to see their children. This assumption places an undue burden on fathers to prove their fitness and involvement, while mothers are often presumed competent by default. A common argument that you'll often hear feminists make is that fathers are awarded custody of the children well over 90% of the time when they seek it. They even go so far as to argue it's proof that not only is there no bias against fathers in family court, but one that in fact favors them. They'll further state that the only reason most mothers get custody is because fathers don't want it and don't pursue it, usually followed by a claim it's because they don't care about their children, which again is pure fallacy. Is any of that in fact true? The answer is no, not even remotely. Multiple reputable studies show that the courts overwhelmingly favor mothers in custody decisions, awarding them sole or primary physical custody in approximately 80 to 85% of cases where custody is contested. This has been shown time and again in states across the country, and it disproves the feminist claims outright. But it goes even further than that, which we'll address momentarily. First, however, I want to take a moment and address a reality which needs to be brought up in the context of any discussion of custody. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that not only is awarding mothers primary or sole custody by default unfair to fathers, but it is also highly detrimental to children. Children which, as countless studies have shown, would benefit most from having two actively involved parents. Research from the American Psychological Association, among others, highlights that children with involved fathers experience better academic outcomes, stronger social relationships, less drug and alcohol abuse, lower instances of teen pregnancy, and fewer behavioral problems as a whole compared to those with limited paternal involvement. To sum it up, the failure to view fathers as parents as vital to the health and well-being of their children isn't just affecting the parties involved, it's affecting society as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, the statistic that feminists love to use to misrepresent the reality is that fathers receive custody or visitation in 90% of the cases where they request it. The key point, though, that they fail to bring up is how do you define custody? Something that, when accounted for, paints a very, very different picture. This misrepresentation is something they adhere to as gospel and cite all the time, primarily to dismiss concerns about custody bias and perpetuate the outdated gender norms that they claim to be fighting against. That 90% figure is misleading because, as I said, it doesn't reflect what kind of custody fathers are getting when they fight, just that they get some sort of custody. Feminists, when they make that claim, want you to believe that fathers are getting primary or sole custody in those cases. In reality, however, it's that fathers, more often than not, are being awarded joint custody, which again is a nebulous term at best. It does not equate to equal parenting time or even decision-making authority. In fact, if anything, it limits both. In most cases, courts grant mothers primary physical custody, designating the fathers as visitors who have limited influence over their children's daily lives. For example, a father who is granted joint custody usually will only have the child every other weekend and perhaps one night a week for dinner. This is known as the standard order, and it's been the de facto court order put in place for most cases for almost 50 years now. Interestingly, there is absolutely no scientific or legal basis to support this paradigm, nor, to my knowledge, has it ever been codified into law. It was simply created by a few judges many years ago and subsequently has become the norm. It is, in reality, nothing more than an offshoot of the tender years doctrine. This standard order results in the children spending roughly 15% of their time with dad, while mom gets them 85% of the time. Additionally, while in theory joint custody gives fathers a say in their child's education and the medical decisions, the reality is it is the mother who retains primary control of the children's residence, education, and healthcare decisions. In fact, in some states, she only has to inform the father of her decision to fulfill her obligation under the joint custody order. These arrangements often leave fathers feeling marginalized, with no real input into their children's lives, despite being labeled as joint custodians. Add to it that denial of visitation is very common with mothers who face little to no accountability for doing so, while literally millions of fathers have been put in debtor's prison for being unable to meet their child support obligations. Again, I challenge you to not believe what I'm saying, but to go and ask a divorced dad if he's ever had issues with seeing his children. You'll find that if you do, almost every single one of them has dealt with it at one time or another. And go a step further. Ask any reputable divorce attorney how often mothers get sanctioned, sent to prison, or face any repercussions whatsoever for their violations of court orders. Again, you'll find it's very rare indeed that any do. To sum it up, while feminists want you to believe fathers will be granted custody if they seek it, which is partially true, they also want you to believe that fathers are being given sole or primary custody, which the facts have shown to be complete fiction. Which leads us to our next point. What are the actual barriers that fathers face when it comes to seeking custody, and why don't they pursue it more often? As I mentioned earlier, fathers face significant hurdles when seeking sole or primary custody. In fact, they face barriers even when seeking joint custody in many cases. The truth is, most reputable lawyers are honest with their male clients and often caution them against pursuing such outcomes unless there is clear, compelling, and irrefutable evidence that the mother is unfit. Most of them will tell you, even then, it's a crapshoot at best. Again, this is not because fathers are incapable of being primary caregivers. There are countless examples of fathers being excellent caregivers and children thriving under their care. No, it is because the legal system in practice still adheres to the tender years doctrine, as well as has a financial incentive to be predisposed to favor awarding custody to mothers in such cases. Family law judges who are supposed to be neutral and who are supposed to be putting the best interests of the child first are still heavily influenced by societal norms that prioritize maternal caregiving. Even when fathers present evidence of their fitness, their efforts can be undermined by biases that frame their actions in doing so as contentious or adversarial. As my very own divorce attorney told me many years ago, a father who asserts his ability to parent is seen by judges as abusive and controlling, while a mother who does so is heroically fighting for her children. And that is a reality I've personally seen time and again take place in family court. A place where judges routinely viewed fathers who dared to stand up and fight to remain parents as dangerous, while mothers, even with incontrovertible evidence to the contrary, were and are seen as paragons of virtue. This very real dynamic discourages fathers from fighting for custody and often compels them to accept joint custody arrangements that favor mothers as the primary caregivers because in the end, it is the best possible outcome. This reality is again contrary to the feminist claim and highlights the fact that any father who fights for custody is likely to lose not just the custody battle, but their right to be a parent at all. Again, I challenge anyone who doesn't want to accept that, who doesn't want to believe me, to go observe family courts in action, something that is perfectly legal to do. And anyone who does so and does so with an open mind will see everything I've said play out time and time again. They'll see good, decent fathers be pushed to the side, have their children ripped away from them based solely on the fact that they are the father and not the mother. It happens in millions upon millions of cases every single year, and it's led to the downfall of society. Which begs the question, why? Why, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that doing so isn't a good thing, isn't what's actually in the best interest of the child, do judges almost automatically award custody to the mothers? Let's answer that question. As I said, one of the most glaring inequities in the custody process is the presumption of maternal fitness. Courts in almost every case presume that mothers, simply because of their gender, are better suited to the caregiving role. At the same time, it's quite common to require fathers to provide extensive proof of their parental involvement and capabilities during the marriage. They'll often be told that they should go take parenting classes, at their own cost, I might add, to show the judge that they're capable of taking care of children, while mothers never face any such obligation. I've actually seen cases where stay-at-home fathers were forced to go to parenting classes despite the fact they had been the one who stayed home taking care of and raising the children for years while mom worked. Add to it, since there usually aren't ways to definitively prove who did what as far as taking care of the children, it becomes a he said, she said situation as to who did what and to what level with regard to caring for the children. And do you want to take any guesses on who the judges are more likely to believe in that scenario? This double standard places an undue burden on fathers who must navigate a legal landscape that scrutinizes their fitness while giving mothers not just the benefit of the doubt, but absolute carte blanche. This is further supported by a 2020 survey of family law attorneys that found that 70% of the respondents believed the courts held the fathers to a higher standard than they do the mothers when evaluating custody cases. The fact remains that fathers are often required to provide detailed evidence of their involvement in their children's lives. Things such as records of school pickups, or attending extracurricular activities, or taking the children for medical appointments. Mothers, on the other hand, are rarely, if ever, subjected to the same level of scrutiny, a bias, I might add, that extends beyond the courtroom. As I mentioned earlier, a father's decision to challenge custody arrangements is frequently viewed as aggressive or combative, even when his actions are motivated by a genuine desire to maintain a close relationship with his children. Contrast that with the belief that if he doesn't fight, well, then it's because he's a terrible father, one who doesn't love his children, doesn't care about them, doesn't want anything to do with them. It's the siren song you hear from feminists and especially from single mothers over and over, where they make these claims knowing full well they'll never be called into question for doing so. The father is simply labeled as a deadbeat at best, and thus must pay for his refusal to own up to his obligations. They then go on, of course, to add that if fathers truly cared, they'd fight more for their children. Curiously, these people never want to discuss why is he being made to fight at all. The fact of the matter is, dads are damned if they do and damned if they don't. Though to be fair, they're far more likely to face consequences if they do. Judges and court officials almost always interpret custody challenges as an unwillingness to cooperate, that the dad is unwilling or unable to co-parent, something which can and usually is then used against the fathers when making custody determinations. The sad fact is, this alone accounts for why so few fathers fight for custody. Any competent attorney will tell a father the reality of the biases against them and the uphill battle that he'll face. But what happens if they do want to fight for their rights? What happens if they do want to take care of their children? Well, my friends, that's when another reality kicks in: the cost to doing so. The terrible price to be paid emotionally, mentally, physically is high, but the cost to do so financially often bankrupts fathers and cripples them for years, even decades to come. The financial burden of a custody dispute is a significant barrier for fathers. Between legal fees, custody evaluations, and court-mandated mediation services, the charges quickly add up, making it difficult for fathers to sustain prolonged legal battles. Collectively, fathers in the United States spend billions of dollars annually fighting for custody or to maintain their visitation rights. Let me repeat that. Fathers spend billions of dollars every single year to remain fathers. Yet, the belief of society, politicians, and the legal system is that fathers don't care about their children and are walking away from them in droves. Make it make sense. And another point to be made is it defies logic when feminists claim that fathers don't care about their children, don't fight for custody, and when they do, it's only because they want to avoid paying child support when they're spending billions of dollars every year in their fight. It's a lie that feminism has long perpetuated, and it's pure lunacy to make such claims while at the same time these fathers are spending those billions upon billions of dollars every single year fighting to remain dads. As I said, the prevailing belief that fathers have shoved down their throats by moms, the courts, and society is that if they truly wanted to be fathers, then they'd fight harder. And again, I say, why are they being made to fight at all? Well, my friends, the answer to that is quite simple. Because it makes the lawyers a lot of money. A lot of money. And this sentiment ignores the immense financial and emotional toll a custody battle has, and shifts the blame completely onto the fathers for systemic inequalities. The truth that no one wants to admit is that a typical custody battle will cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars and take months, if not years, to be adjudicated. And almost all of that burden will be placed on the father. And where does that money go? Well, my friends, it goes straight from the family's bank accounts into the lawyers. The well-hidden truth is that the family court system and divorce in general is designed to be one of the biggest methods of wealth transfer ever devised. It is largely why politicians, who are overwhelmingly lawyers, as well as judges and attorneys themselves, work so diligently to maintain the corrupt system as it is. It's why they refuse to acknowledge that the current system is broken and that the best interest of the child paradigm is anything but. It's why they refuse to implement changes in the law, such as shared parenting or meaningful child support reform, lest it upset the apple cart. Better little Johnny's college fund be spent on legal fees in a custody battle so the attorneys can pay for their new boats or second vacation homes than for it to be used to, provide him with a college education. Add to it that on top of the tremendous financial burden to cover the legal fees, fathers are also burdened with onerous child support orders and having to maintain the same quality of life for his children, not just when they're with him, but when they're with their mother as well. And again, it goes back to the real question of why. Why are fathers forced to fight so hard to maintain relationships with their children in the first place? The answer, as I said, is because it's making lawyers rich to do so. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no, my friends, there's another financial burden that has to be discussed, one that breaks the backs, literally and figuratively, for fathers. The infamous logic-defying belief that children shouldn't suffer any hardship after a divorce, that they should have the very same standard of living post-divorce that they had before. It is the defining reason and justification for child support and why it is set up the way that it is, as well as why who is best able to pay the highest amount of it. Well, that's the biggest factor that determines who will retain custody of the children. And that is the biggest reason why there are so many custody battles, because in the end, to the victor goes the spoils. Family courts, much like criminal courts, are run based on an adversarial basis. Rather than encouraging parents to cooperate, to do what's right for the children, to do what's best for themselves and their entire family, the courts are set up to get the parents to target one another, to put each other down, to cause as much rancor and anger as possible. Oh, they'll never admit that. In fact, they go to great lengths to deny that. But it is the reality that's out there. And again, we need to ask why. And that why is simple. The more anger, the more time in court. The more time in court, the more money the lawyers make. And it's why the winner in a custody battle is likely going to get the house, the car, and most of the other assets to go along with the kids. It's why they're also going to get a sizable chunk of the loser's income for years, if not decades to come. The financial incentive is so powerful, and it's why many mothers don't just fight for custody, but file for divorce in the first place. Think about it. Knowing they have an 85% chance of winning, knowing that they'll be richly rewarded for doing so, why would any mother put any effort whatsoever into working on her marriage? Why bother doing anything but running down and filing for divorce, knowing that if you do, you'll most likely get the house, the car, the kids, and years of child support, and then be able to go find another guy who can also contribute to maintaining or raising her standard of living? It's all reward with little to no risk. Add to it the fact that child support calculations are usually tied to custody arrangements, creating an even larger financial incentive for mothers to seek primary physical custody and limit as much as they can time spent with the father for their children. It creates a paradigm of winner take all, with the primary winners in the end not actually being the parents, but being the attorneys and judges who created that rancor in the first place. This dynamic complicates custody negotiations, as it introduces a monetary dimension that can, and almost always does, overshadow what's in the best interest of the child. Custody is awarded not by who is the better parent, but who makes less money, so that the burden can then be placed on the person who makes more. A 2022 analysis by the Urban Institute found that child support payments accounted for a significant portion of income for custodial mothers, particularly in lower income households. This reliance on child support can incentivize mothers to not just fight for sole or primary custody, but to do everything they can to make it as difficult as possible for the father to even see the children, let alone get any kind of custody with them. It turns children from being human beings into property, nothing more, nothing less. Property to be used as leverage to gain a financial windfall. This holds true in most cases, even despite the fact it's been shown time and again that shared custody is more beneficial, far more beneficial, not just in the short term, but throughout a child's entire life. Critics have long argued against this system that prioritizes financial considerations over parenting equality. And by linking child support payments to custody arrangements, the system reinforces that adversarial dynamic between parents and discourages cooperative co-parenting. And that too is a reality that fathers know to be true, which again is another reason why they don't seek custody. Let's get back to that feminist narrative, the one that says fathers are disinterested or unwilling parents, ones who don't fight for custody because, well, they don't care about their children. A narrative which, at the same time, demonizes those fathers that do care and who do fight for their rights, only to be told that the only reason they're doing it is to avoid paying child support. Funny how that belief doesn't apply to mothers. I mean, if fathers only fight for custody to avoid paying child support, wouldn't we also have to agree that mothers only fight for custody to get child support? Yet woe be it for anyone to suggest such a thing. Yet it's the very real reality at play in most divorces. This myth perpetuates harmful stereotypes and undermines their role as fathers in the children's lives, which is exactly why feminists push it so hard. Their goal is, and has long been, to get the fathers out of the house, to break up families and remove the influence of fathers on their children, lest they be less likely to follow or support the feminist agenda. It is not and never has been about equality or doing what's best for the children. It's always been about pushing an anti-male, anti-father agenda, and it's been going on for decades now, for multiple generations now, and we wonder why society is where it is. Add to it that popular culture usually depicts fathers as aloof or absent, utterly incapable of taking care of themselves, let alone a child, thus reinforcing the idea that they're less capable or invested in parenting. In their minds, every man, every father is as incompetent as Homer Simpson, and thus needs to be removed from the home, and indeed all of society. These stereotypes influence public perceptions of custody disputes, making it easier to dismiss fathers' concerns as self-serving or insincere. And it's further reinforced by the lies used to hide the truth, to hide the bias against fathers in courts. The lies that are spread which claim there is no bias against fathers, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. In reality, most fathers deeply value their relationships with their children and are willing to make significant sacrifices to maintain those connections. It's something they've proved time and again, yet it is rarely acknowledged or even recognized. In fact, if anything, as we've said before, it's demonized. So what can be done? Addressing the inequalities in the family court system requires a comprehensive approach, one that prioritizes the best interests of the children while ensuring fairness for both parents. It starts with the complete removal of the tender years doctrine. While yes, in some states the laws have been rewritten to remove it, the reality is the practice is still alive and well in the courts. In addition to rewriting any laws that remain, there needs to be extensive work put into eliminating the gender bias that absolutely exists in the courts. Courts should be forced to evaluate parental fitness based on evidence, not assumptions about gender roles, and state their reasons in detail for their findings. No more should it be just left up to a judge's whim. Instead, they should be required to document in detail why they've made the decision that they did and how it benefits the child to do so. These decisions affect children for years, often for their entire lives, yet there is little to no accountability for the judges making those decisions. Additionally, judges, lawyers, and any other members of the court should undergo training and scrutiny to ensure that fathers and mothers are being held to the very same standards when determining custody arrangements. Further, we need to end the winner-takes-all mentality that permeates family law. To do so, we can start by promoting shared parenting, which presumes that both parents are equally capable and should have as much time with the children as possible, and then makes adjustments from there. As opposed to the current paradigm where it's presumed that one parent is by default better than the other, and thus they should get the children 100% of the time, and then adjustments are made from there. The fact is, states that have implemented shared parenting laws such as Kentucky, have reported far better outcomes for children and higher satisfaction among parents and substantially lower rancor and costs to families going through a divorce. It's actually a no-brainer. Yet, it's women's groups and, most telling, the Bar Association that are so adamantly opposed to implementing shared parenting. Making shared parenting the default arrangement has been proven to reduce the adversarial nature of custody disputes and ensure that both parents remain actively involved in their children's lives. Why don't we want that? Further, we need to focus on reforming child support policies. We need to start by decoupling child support payments from custody arrangements and having a recognition that it is virtually impossible, unless the family is super rich, to maintain the same standard of living in two households that would be had in one. This would go a long way towards eliminating the financial incentives that can, and usually do, skew custody decisions. We also need to recognize that children are children, not financial pawns to be used as leverage, and hold those accountable who do want to use them as leverage. Other things that should be considered are income sharing arrangements or bird nesting, both of which could provide far more equitable solutions. Additionally, legal aid programs and mediation services should be expanded to help fathers who cannot afford the high cost of custody battles. The transfer of wealth from these families to lawyers needs to be stopped. As we've shown, it harms the children, harms the parents, and harms the family as a whole, often for the rest of their lives. Having resources that support fathers and help them to protect their paternal rights would level the playing field and ensure that all parents have access to fair representation. Finally, we need to focus on raising awareness of the importance of fathers and the role that they play in their children's lives. And that starts by doing away with the deadbeat dad stereotype, which has been used for over 30 years now to further political agendas and punish good fathers. Further, public education campaigns that actually challenge existing stereotypes about fathers and highlight the importance of paternal involvement need to be put into action. Currently, most of these campaigns are directed at fathers, telling them they need to be more responsible, when in reality, they've not shirked their responsibilities in the least. Instead, these campaigns should be directed towards those who interfere with the father-child relationship. For example, how about we have a campaign that tells mothers who play games with visitation schedules or who make videos on social media trashing their children's father that doing so doesn't make them a good mom, but in fact, a terrible one. Yeah, I know, fat chance that'll ever happen, but we can dream, can't we? Only by changing societal attitudes and showing fathers for who they really are and how truly valuable they are to their children can we create a more supportive environment for fathers who want to play active roles in their children's lives, which almost every father does. If we truly want to say we're going to do what's in the best interest of the children, it starts with ensuring that their father can remain in their life, not just as a wallet, but as a parent. The feminist myth that men do not want custody of their children is patently false and has caused tremendous harm to society. It perpetuates outdated stereotypes, obscures systemic biases, and diminishes the challenge that fathers face in family courts. It values fathers and children not as human beings, but as financial pawns to be moved around the chessboard and sacrificed for the benefit of others, most often the queen, aka mom. Every societal ill that we face can be in some way traced back to fatherlessness and the root cause of it, which is the family court system. Until we acknowledge that and take measures to address it, things will only get worse. Worse for our children and worse for society as a whole. Only by addressing these inequalities and advocating for reform can we as a society move forward. Move toward a more just system that respects the rights of both parents and one which truly prioritizes the well-being of children. Contrary to what feminists claim, fathers are not absent by choice. They are often excluded by a system that undervalues their contributions and by mothers who seek the financial benefits in doing so. It denies men their God-given right to equal opportunity to parent. And more importantly, it denies children their God-given right to be parented by both their mother and their father. It's time to challenge this false narrative and work towards a future where all parents are treated with fairness and dignity and given the respect that they deserve. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos where we talk about the issues men and boys face and how we can address them. Till next time, this is Dan from Men Need to Be Heard. I hope you have an awesome day.